45,000 people, that's still a lot of people to go without power. And there are still significant harms that can happen even from outages that are more limited and that are successful and that they don't, expand drastically. So there has been, I think, a shift in the conversation and a lot of questions around, should we be strengthening protections for these lower level, lower impact is what they say, parts of the system.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. It's quite a niche topic. How did you find your way? I mean, I guess we can work backwards. I know we're going to talk about some attacks and then their ties to some extremist groups, specifically some neo-Nazi activities. But I mean, you've obviously been reporting about the power grid for quite some time. How did you find your way into that particular topic?
Yeah, so I have been a power grid reporter for 6 years, and one major piece of reporting on the power grid is grid security, grid reliability, just broadly. Keeping the lights on is the number one focus of utilities. And what I had actually been seeing an increase of in recent years, or what I'd actually been seeing an uptick in conversation about in recent years was cybersecurity concerns. Mm-hmm. That has been a huge concern of utilities. But then honestly, what really got me involved in looking into physical attacks was these high profile incidents that happened that I'm sure we'll get into. The Moore County attack was that left 45,000 people in North Carolina without power. That was a huge deal. We just hadn't seen anything like that. And then to see this threat in Baltimore just a few months later made me start to look into this. And as I was talking to people and as I was talking to folks, I was hearing that, this is part of a trend. And so looked into the data myself and found that it in fact was a trend, and that and confirmed that numbers have been rising. And I think I first made those calculations in 2021 or 2022, and then the most recent data I have from 2023 shows another uptick. So it keeps going up. I don't have the data for 2024 yet, but we'll see.
Yeah. Maybe the Moore County one is a good one to start with. Do you want to unpack that? What happened there, who these people were, and what were they trying to, I mean, obviously they were trying to interrupt the grid, but I feel like there has to be a larger why for them as opposed to just, I want to make sure people can't turn their lights on.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing about Moore County is we don't know why yet. No one has been caught in that incident. So what happened in Moore County, North Carolina was there were 2 substations shot out, destroyed, and that ultimately cut off power to 45,000 people for several days. A woman died, an 80-something, I'll check my notes, an 87-year-old, I believe. Yes, an 87-year-old woman who relied on an oxygen tank died in that situation. There were a lot of rumors flying around at that time that haven't been substantiated yet. But so there's an FBI investigation ongoing. But what that definitely did was it sparked a lot of concern among grid experts who said, wow, these were remote rural substations that weren't very protected, and they caused this much harm to these people they caused a ton of economic harm. It caused, more people certainly could have died depending on the weather. And what also happened was you saw folks start to cite this incident as, oh, look what they did in Moore County. We can do that in other places like Baltimore. So I think that is unfortunately the legacy of Moore County, even if we don't actually know the reasoning behind those attacks, yeah, as of now.
Did they just locate some remote substations and shoot guns at them, essentially? I mean, not to make a
Yeah.
complicated thing simple, but
Yeah, I think that's, from my understanding, that's essentially what happened. And so there are certain assets on the grid where if you damage them, it can take a while to replace, or just can lead to wider outages in a region, and that's what happened here. But my understanding is that it was that simple.
which that in and of itself is a little scary. You would like to think that I don't know, that there's an AI program and robots patrolling around our grid at all times, whether physical or metaphorical. And I mean, again, we don't know who did this, but some Yahoo rolls up in a truck and takes a few shots with a high power rifle at a transformer, and 45,000 people are now, to a degree, fending for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are certainly assets on the grid that have stronger protections. And I think the other thing that Moore County did was to back up the kind of the philosophy in the utility industry is we protect diamonds like diamonds and we protect pencils like pencils. That's what I hear all the time. And the diamonds are and the diamonds are these really important parts of the grid that if they go down, it's wide swaths of the system go down. And the pencils are these substations in remote areas that will have limited outages. They won't lead to cascading failures, throughout a wide portion of the country. But what Moore County, I think, taught a lot of people is that, okay, 45,000 people, that's still a lot of people to go without power. And there are still significant harms that can happen even from outages that are more limited and that are successful and that they don't, expand drastically. So there has been, I think, a shift in the conversation and a lot of questions around, should we be strengthening protections for these lower level, lower impact is what they say, parts of the system?
It's all fun and games and nice to say protect diamonds like diamonds and pencils like pencils until you are directly involved in one of those. I wonder if they would consider their own friends or family who were impacted or affected by one of those in terms of being a pencil or a diamond, if they actually had to live through something like that. Yeah.
And I think that is where this incident was very sobering for the industry, because again, in some ways it didn't lead to these, they've been so concerned for so many years about these huge cascading outages and the threat that could cause and the chaos that would sow. And I think that there's been less focus on these more localized outages, despite, again, knowing that can be very harmful as well.
So let's forward a little bit to Baltimore. Talk to me about what happened there.
Yeah, so what happened in Baltimore was there was a plot that was unveiled, prevented, fortunately, before anything happened. And there were these two individuals had planned a coordinated attack. They were going to take out 5 substations around the city of Baltimore. And if you look at a map, Baltimore is basically surrounded by this big circle of substations. So, and of course, on the other side is water. So this would have essentially cut Baltimore off from a lot of the grid, and it would have been very hard to bring the power back on. And it just would have been a very dangerous situation for a city with a large population, a region with a large population. And so that was their plan in this situation. And I'm happy to talk about, more about who those suspects were, or actually they have been, one of them at least has been sentenced, so no longer suspects, but.
I think we should absolutely dive into who they were. Spoiler alert for people, they had links to neo-Nazi groups, which begs more questions than answers probably that comes with that. But yeah, if you could break down kind of their associations, who they were, and again, what was the ultimate end state that they were looking for in the motivation? Like, why Baltimore? Why those areas? What were they actually trying to do? Yeah,
so I can start with Brandon Russell, who you could say was kind of the probably the more of the brain, or more of the person
The ringleader,
coordinating
if you
it,
will.
yes, the coordinator, the ringleader. There you go. So he was actually the leader of a neo-Nazi group in Florida known as the Atomwaffen. And
Jesus.
and he was actually in jail. He was jailed a few years ago, and was on supervised parole when he was planning this attack. And during his initial, when he was first in jail, that was because investigators basically found explosives and all these materials at his house. They also found, they were also told that he had planned to carry out a similar plot to take down the grid. He wasn't actually arrested for that reason, but I think we can say that's probably why they kept an eye on him. And so he went to prison for 60 months for possession of an unregistered destructive device, improper storage of explosive materials, and then was on supervised release when he began plotting with this other individual, Sarah Beth Clendaniel, who he had met in prison. Both of these individuals subscribe to an ideology that has been growing in right-wing circles called accelerationism, which is this idea that by cutting off infrastructure, specifically by cutting off power, by cutting off people's ability to access the things that they're used to, that you can accelerate some sort of societal collapse, a race war. And the idea is that basically white leadership would rise to the top in this occasion. So it's a bizarre theory to discuss because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest, if I'm just about it intuitively. But it's a philosophy that has taken off in recent years and is part of the reason why, or is a big reason why grid infrastructure in particular has been targeted, because folks see that as a way to, again, accelerate the collapse of society.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode is brought to you by Firecracker Farms. A question for you, perhaps it's too personal. Do you like things hot? I'm talking about your food. I'm actually talking about seasoning, in this case, specifically salt. Specifically, Firecracker Farm hot salt. I never thought salt could be, I guess the word would be dynamic. So Firecracker Farms, they're made with Ghost, Scorpion, and Carolina Reaper peppers. The flavor is ridiculously delicious, and everything you put it on gets better. It isn't too hot. If you're familiar with peppers, those 3 that I listed, they're spicy. But this is a choose your own adventure. The first time that I tried this salt, I put it on a ribeye steak, my personal favorite. I didn't really know what to expect because I've salted steaks many times before, but holy cow, this is the only thing I have put on any steak that I have made since that day. Firecracker Farm is a very small family brand. It's just the founder Alex and his family going all in on a great product and supporting great causes, like Operation 300 and the Pipe Hitter Foundation, with a percentage of every sale. Alex has been legitimately bugging me to be a sponsor of Change Agents for a while now, and here's what I can wholeheartedly say. His product is in fact awesome. It's not as good as you might think it is, it's better. So go get some while you can at firecracker.farm. Use code Ironclad to get 15% off your first order at firecracker.farm. What's going on, everybody? I want to let you know about an ongoing effort in Western North Carolina to help victims of Hurricane Helene and how you can help our friends at the Sentinel Foundation. The hurricane has displaced people around the region and destroyed countless homes. However, Sentinel is on the ground helping. They've been actively getting critical supplies to residents in some of the area's most isolated locations. They've been able to provide over 60 Starlink systems to fire departments, police departments, and churches so that they can communicate and coordinate for their communities. They've also organized both aircraft and ground units to transport and deliver donations. So far, they've accepted and organized an estimated 7 million pounds of materials and distributed about 4 million pounds to support the ongoing relief efforts. Sentinel has also continued to monitor reports of child trafficking, exploitation within the area of operation through law enforcement. To find out more about their efforts to help hurricane victims and their anti-child exploitation efforts, and to see how you can help, please check out foundationsentinel.org. Accelerationism. I have not heard that. So in a nutshell, it sounds like they're trying to sow social unrest so that we all have, probably in their terms, I bet you they use terms like civil war, We end up having a civil war or a battle among society, which when, of course, in their eyes, their master race will rise to the top, to the position of power that they should have been at. That's, God, I'm glad we live in a free country, but some ideas really deserve a lot more scrutiny than others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the idea too that we're already on this path and this will accelerate the path, it's quite the philosophy for sure.
So, and again, this is, I mean, I guess this isn't directly tied to the power grid, but in your reporting and looking into people like this, are you truly seeing this ideology? Is it growing? Is it hopping from people that are talking about just this grid to other ways that they are trying to interrupt societal means?
Yeah, so what I've seen in both academic reports and in DHS type reports is that the grid and other critical infrastructure, telecommunications, transportation, that kind of critical infrastructure is a growing target for domestic extremists in particular, having to do with that ideology. George Washington University's program on extremism in particular has done a lot of research on the growth of white supremacists targeting critical infrastructure in the US. So that's definitely something that I've been seeing that again is based on, other people's very extensive research for sure.
How far along did they get into this plan before they were arrested?
That's a good question. They were arrested well before there was any sort of anything happened.
Good.
So the way they were caught was they had a FBI informant was basically, he was one of their co-conspirators. He was undercover as one of their co-conspirators. So he had messages from between the three of them going back months. And so he, once things got more serious, he was able to he stopped it, but filed criminal charges and these individuals were arrested.
How did they select Baltimore? Did they both live in Florida, or was he still living in Florida at the time where they were planning this?
I believe she lived in Maryland, and
okay.
I haven't seen specifics about why Baltimore was the target, other than that it's racially diverse was
for sure
part of the reasoning. So that was it, but I believe that Sarah Clendaniel was from Maryland.
How's the legal system currently treating her? Is she free and clear of this, or is she still in it?
No, she is. She was actually recently sentenced to 18 years in prison and a lifetime of supervised release. That was in September. And I don't believe that Brandon Russell, I looked it up the other day, and I don't believe he's been sentenced yet.
Okay, so he's still working his way through the law enforcement system. All right. So the FBI had an informant, as they often do. Have you been able to talk with anybody at that particular organization? What kind of things are they seeing at this federal law enforcement level? Attacks on infrastructure by extremist group. Is this something that is rising in concern? Like if it was a blip on a radar screen, it's starting to get brighter and brighter and brighter?
So I have not been able to speak with anyone from the FBI. I've seen materials from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security that they sent to utilities, and I was able to obtain that do paint this picture of a rising threat of these groups in particular, and specifically attacking infrastructure. But I haven't been able to speak to someone from the FBI specifically. They haven't returned my calls. So,
well, how do you even call the FBI? Do you just dial 1-800-FBI? I don't think that's enough numbers, but
I think it's probably like press office at FBI.gov or something.
Shocker, they're not just picking up the phone and getting right back.
Yeah, they don't give me all the details. What I have heard from regulators, from both state regulators and federal regulators, there have been some complaints that the FBI, they don't feel the FBI is coordinating with their agencies, and these are agencies that are in charge of regulating the grid, so they feel that they should be a little bit more in the loop on these situations. What I've heard in defense of the FBI is that, these are criminal proceedings. they have their processes, and there are probably a limited number of people they want to kind of let in on this, and that might not necessarily fall to grid regulators. So, you know, take that with that what you will, but that's what I hear from regulators, at least.
All right. So outside of these two chuckleheads, the man and the woman from Florida and Maryland, and their attempted attack or their plan to attack Baltimore, what else have you come across when it comes to extremist groups like this and their desires to attack the grid?
Yeah, so there have been several arrests in recent years related to that tie with neo-Nazi groups in particular, white supremacy groups in particular. So several plots have been thwarted in recent years, having to do with plans to attack the grid. The interesting thing about that versus then the data that I have is, of course, in the data that I have, these are mostly attacks that have attacks or really threats of attacks or attempted attacks that have happened that where no one's been caught and there hasn't been any sort of follow-up, I guess. So there are a lot of incidents where we don't know the motivation, but from folks who have been caught and, for instance, that have been thwarted, there's definitely been several incidents related to neo-Nazis. And like I said, this George Washington University did research on and where they looked back at arrests basically and found that since 2019, white supremacist attack plots against critical infrastructure systems have distinctly increased, is what they said, and specifically 13 individuals associated with the movement, with the white supremacy movement, were arrested and charged in federal court with planning attacks on the energy sector. 11 of those were after 2020, so you can see that that's a lot in recent years. And this report was from maybe a year or two ago, so those numbers might even be updated since then.
I mean, I know almost nothing about these type of groups other than what I can learn on documentaries or having conversations with someone like yourself. The fact that they are the accelerationism, it's like, okay, so they have a shared ideology. I mean, people are free to believe whatever they want to. I personally believe that ideology is ridiculous in a variety, and that's the kind word that I'm going to choose to use for that. But it seems as if, I guess where I'm going, that it is not random that multiple groups throughout the U.S. are targeting these particular grid systems. It would, to me, seem like it is coordinated to some level and degree. And I'm curious as if your reporting has encountered any of that level of coordination, and how are they doing so?
Yeah, so this part of the scary thing about this trend is a lot of this planning is happening on these encrypted app systems. I guess I don't want to name specific systems, but
if you have a smart device, people can figure it out. They're in the App Store, everybody. So we'll call them messenger devices that are proclaimed to be free and clear of oversight from the government. However, I did an episode recently where the FBI was directly involved in a phone that was supposed to be encrypted for drug dealers, and they're just sitting there reading their messages. I love it.
That's good to know.
Well, yeah, I love it that they were able to do that, but at the same time, I'm like, son of a bitch. Are you guys reading my messages too? Not that I'm talking about anything exciting, but privacy is
maybe
privacy.
Reassuring in this instance where, and where of course you've seen like the Baltimore plot where this FBI agent, that's how he was communicating with folks, was through these encrypted messaging platforms. But with this information age, I mean, there is just so much information out there that there are blueprints out there for how to lay out these attacks. So when you ask if it's coordinated, it's interesting because it doesn't, at least as of now, there isn't evidence that, all of these people are part of one great big plot, but that information is out there for anyone to use. So in some sense, it's coordinated in that all these folks with the same ideology have the same access to the same information. And again, are seeing examples of places like Moore County where there's no motivation has been ascribed to that, but they are saying, that could have been one of our people and he or she was not caught, or they were not caught. I don't know how many people were involved, but so I think that's another scary piece of it as well.
Yeah, if you look at I have experience with terrorist organizations and the way that when they co-locate at the beginning of the global war on terror, they realized rapidly that we were able to target them. And so they became disaggregate, and they moved out, and they started communicating in different ways. And, a lot of people thought bin Laden was pulling the strings for a long period of time. I personally think that he had kind of passed the torch on to other people. And although a lot of the groups in the variety of countries that they're in weren't directly communicating, it's kind of the same thing. They were sharing information. This is how you build this particular type of explosive device. This is how you can build HME, or homemade explosives. And there'd be a little bit of a Venn diagram overlap on some of the internet circles or informational portals that they would communicate through. So, is it really a guy twisting his mustache in a gray uniform, trying to direct all of this? Or is information just kind of making its way through these little different swimming pools and tainting the water that's in them a little bit? I mean, the end state seems to be the same. They're taking the information and they're attacking the infrastructure where they think it's vulnerable. But I wonder how far back up, if you go upstream of that, I wonder how far upstream somebody is really trying to manipulate the levers of control.
Yeah. Who the original person was who started, distributing these blueprints, and I don't know, but to your point, it's definitely the result is the same, where you have all of these folks with I would say very extremely malintentioned folks with access to this information that is dangerous to our critical infrastructure, to our society.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get into elite shape, or perhaps just make improvements to your current level of fitness, check out the Mountain Tough digital training program. You can try it for free for 14 days, and you can see the results for yourself. The app allows users to train wherever they are with minimal equipment requirements, whether you're in the gym or you're outdoors or you're at home. Users can access top-tier programming that fits into their lifestyle. The Mountain Tough app offers expertly designed progressive training plans that guide users from start to finish. These plans are tailored to build resilience, strength, and endurance over time, preventing burnout and injury. The app features self-guided and follow-along coaching videos, allowing users to be coached through every workout step by step. This helps to ensure proper form, motivation, and intensity, regardless of the user's fitness level. The Mountain Tough app delivers training programs built for the unique physical demands of mountain athletes, including hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers. The programs themselves are designed by seasoned strength and conditioning experts, elite athletes, and military veterans. Start your 14-day free trial today and check out the results for yourself. And be sure to use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS, and I'm looking at it as one word, at signup, and you can get 40% off your annual subscription. Remember, use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS at checkout. So in the show notes in front of me, and looking at, looks like there was an infrastructure attack in recent years. There was some in California, Tacoma, Washington, North Carolina. I think we covered that one. Do you know anything about the California or Tacoma, Washington attacks, what those entailed?
Yeah, so the California attack was one of the first really the first high profile attack in recent history. This was a sniper attack on an electric substation owned by Pacific Gas and Electric in California, as you said, in 2013. So this one did not lead to widespread outages because the utility was able to reroute the power, but it was a close call for the utility, and one of the first where utilities kind of looked around and said, oh man, should we be protecting this stuff a little bit closer? Some folks have referred to that as a wake-up call for the industry and led to some tightening of regulations, so not over all infrastructure, of course. The other incident you mentioned in Tacoma, Washington, left 14,000 people without power on Christmas Day. And those folks were caught. It was two men who shot out 4 substations in the region, and the motive for that was actually burglary. So unrelated to to white supremacy or neo-Nazis. The intention was just to cut power out for a bunch of businesses and rob those businesses. So,
I mean, again, I want to be careful what I say because I'm not interested in motivating people or giving them ideas. But I mean, and the examples we've talked about so far, there's some similarities. We're talking about substations here. I mean, it's disturbing that there is such a low barrier to entry to have such a high level of impact on a large group of people. I mean, I hadn't thought about that from a burglary perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to shut down people's alarms, if you want to shut down, whatever electronics they may have, cameras on their house that may not have a battery backup, I'm like, okay, I hadn't actually thought about that. When you talk to the industry professionals inside of the power grid, broader term, air quotes for people just listening, what do they have to say about this? This is just the way it is. There's too many to protect.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Is it a combination of all that? What does the industry have to say about this?
So I would say it's too many to protect, and the cost to protect that many is so huge, and that cost would ultimately come from our pockets. It would come from our power bills, because that's of course how the utility industry makes money. So there are some real concerns from regulators at the highest level. You saw regulators at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is regulates the bulk power system, the backbone of the grid, say, we are in some ways stumped, and we want to basically ramp up protections, of course, and we want the grid to be protected, but we are very concerned about how much this could cost the industry, and therefore cost ratepayers who pay their electricity bills every month. And so it's an interesting balancing act. And even just last week, the CEO of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which develops regulations for the security of, again, the entire bulk power system, he said this is something that continues to weigh on him, that clearly there are these, he said, low impact systems that still have a big impact. And the question of and he said there has to be a middle ground. There has to be some way that we can develop stronger regulations for those without, completely robbing people and costing a ton of money. So it's definitely an ongoing conversation with regulators. And I think the recent years have accelerated those conversations, not to use the word accelerate in a casual way. But
no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought that was really striking just a week ago to hear that was something that continues to weigh on some of the top regulators of the country, is how to balance the costs of that versus the need to clearly ramp up protections.
I mean, I can appreciate the fact that they are thinking about it and they're at least acknowledging that there is an issue. Cost is always an interesting one because, the cost of an event or episode, large scale or small scale, is hard to quantify because it has to happen first before you can develop the recovery costs or rebuilding costs from that. So it's a hypothetical versus, I guess, largely a known cost of hardening or changing the infrastructure. And it is interesting that they would call it, a low impact substation, or the exact vernacular that you used. Everything is low impact until it directly touches your life. And then it's extremely high impact. So let's say it's 10,000 people, sure. And the aggregate number of humans in America that have power, not a large number.
Mm-hmm.
If you're one of those, I live in northwestern Montana. If you're one of those people, 10,000 people that loses power in late December, you've got a real problem on your hands, especially depending on the heating source that your house may use. So those terms are, I can understand the complexity of that. And, I've done some episodes on the risk to the power grid, specifically in California from wildfire. A lot of it is above ground, and they're looking at the cost of doing things below ground and the infrastructure cost and that. And it's this hypothetical of, what if we have these huge fires versus what if we upgrade the power grid first? How do we justify both? Who pays for the cost? I feel like that is a swimming pool that you can drown in without action because there are so many things to talk about that you end up getting weighed to the bottom in just discussion.
Yeah. And to your point, with the utility industry, that's a huge discussion around extreme weather is a great example. Wildfires, hurricanes.
Yeah.
Every hurricane season, this conversation happens of, should we be spending more money to harden against these storms that we know are costing us millions and millions of dollars? And to your point about how much these incidents are costing as well is a good one. And one thing I was thinking about as I was preparing for this episode is that I haven't found a good way to actually estimate the cost of these damages. You name the number of incidents that we've seen over the last several years, but there isn't, unless local media reports or, I'm able to find it in some sort of DHS document that I've seen, there's no federal reporting of how much these incidents cost. So there's not really a great way to say, oh, we could have avoided this much in economic costs, in costs that ultimately, again, will be borne by ratepayers if they have to rebuild all these substations. That analysis at least isn't happening publicly.
I don't know if it's possible. I mean, if you think about it, the mathematical equation isn't actually fair. They could probably tell you what it costs to do a new transformer and whatever, put lines underground or change whatever system that is. But until something large, unfortunately, happens, they're not going to understand. I mean, because you have to take into effect liability and lawsuits as well. I mean, that's going to factor into the overall total cost as well. So who knows? Let's say there is a large scale. Let's say the Baltimore attack had been able to work, and let's say it was in the winter months, which Baltimore gets cold, but not as cold as Montana. All right, let's just keep things in order here. And then you start talking about loss of life, and people start doing research into where these things protected, and you find out that they weren't protected the way that they should have been. And then you have a class action lawsuit. How do you do that math before that actually happens? All they have right now is this massive column of this is what it would cost to repair or harden these things. And you have this hypothetical, maybe it would cost this. That's a real tough one for people to justify.
Yeah. And there's no estimate of even how much some of these incidents have cost so far, which is the difference of what you do see with extreme weather, where you can say, oh, those math conversations are happening because of conversations around climate change. You're starting to say, all right, at some point, is it better to get ahead of some of these things? But you're not seeing those same cost estimates, or not even cost estimates, cost totals of what have we spent so far on recovering lost substations if it's shot out, or when we have a robbery, when someone breaks in, there isn't a real database for that.
What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Gold prices have surged, reaching nearly $2,500, a 20% increase in under a year. With traditional investments under scrutiny, gold and other precious metals have become attractive alternatives. The rise in gold prices reflects growing skepticism towards conventional investments and highlights its stability. Notably, even banks are increasing their gold reserves, underlying its lasting value. Gold isn't just a short-term play, it's a long-term strategy for financial security and growth. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting, gold should be a part of your investment portfolio. Start securing your financial future with Allegiance Gold, a trusted leader in precious metals with top ratings from TrustLink and an A+ accreditation from the Better Business Bureau. Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or delivers precious metals securely to your doorstep. If that sounds interesting to you and you go to protectwithandy.com today, listeners will get an exclusive lowest price on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com, or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Shop the new Freedom Capsule at bornprimitive.com.
In your time looking at the power grid and digging into it, what has kept you up at night the most?
Well, this is funny because this is the question that I ask people. I'm not used to getting asked it. This is my go-to.
The tables have turned.
Yeah, this is my go-to question. And I guess what keeps me up at night is when I talk to grid officials and say, are you worried about this? And they say yes. That's, to me, it's to me, my job is, of course, to be the one talking to the experts and disseminating that information. And it's concerning when and a lot of times you talk to the experts and maybe they'll say, it's overblown. You don't need to be that worried about it. But most people I talk to are concerned about it and raise alarms. And so I think just the level of concern there concerns me. Should I talk about what helps me sleep at night?
I was going to ask you. I mean, of course, you have to know about the other side of the coin. And that what are you the most hopeful about? Because I'm including myself in the following statement. I pay almost no attention to the infrastructure that makes every aspect of my daily life possible. Yeah. And I don't think that most people do. And maybe that's because we don't like knowing how minuscule we are in this system or how much we rely upon other people. But, you live in this world. You have now for the better part of a half of a decade. How, what are you the most hopeful about when you research this entity?
Yeah. And that's where I do think the amount of attention it has, maybe not in the media necessarily, although of course for us, but it does have a lot of attention within regulatory circles, security circles. I think that the people in charge are taking this threat seriously. There are, of course, institutional financial barriers that, again, are concerning. And that's where it's almost until something big happens, you can say, well, nothing big has happened yet. We're fine. We've got it all figured out. So you always want to hedge a little bit where nothing big has happened yet. But I do think that I do get a sense from folks that they genuinely are taking this seriously and this is getting attention. And I think even just, again, hearing that people, that regulators are saying, we want these, we do think that things need to be updated. On the flip side of that, the regulatory process is very slow. And another thing that I've heard that's concerning. Now I'm going back and forth between what keeps me up, but this is realistic.
This is what you do when you're staring at the ceiling fan. When you're staring at the ceiling fan at night, like what scares me? What makes me feel good? So what terrifies me? What lets me go to sleep?
Yeah, that's the realistic look into my head. But the other piece of it is that I've heard that's scary is that the threats are evolving faster than regulations can keep up often. That's what you hear with cybersecurity in particular is that, by the time a new threat evolves, our regulations have just caught up to the threat from 2017. So I think that there is a nimbleness challenge there. And you just hope that the people in charge can keep after it.
This might be asking you to hypothesize here a little bit. Oftentimes when I hear about cybersecurity, which is a threat you hear about all the time in the modern era, which makes sense. I mean, you and I are communicating right now through the technology that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I often hear those threats phrased through external nation state actors, Iran often, China often, Russia often, depending on what flavor you are politically or where you believe in the world. So it seems like a lot of those threats are external. Are you seeing more of these infrastructure? I mean, I guess the physical attack itself, of course, would come from internal, but does it seem to be like if there was a needle and in the middle of the needle would be equal, one side of that is external threat, one side of that is internal. Cybersecurity seems to tip towards external. Does it seem like infrastructure seems to tip a little bit more towards internal?
Yes, that's exactly right. And there actually was a scary report out not too long ago that laid out the fact that we are facing more external threats on the grid specifically is facing more external threats, foreign actors on the cyber side than ever. The actors you named, Iran, China, Russia, trying to hack the grid, hack our systems, and have the capability to do so, by the way. And then at the same time, you were seeing more domestic physical threats than ever, which is again back to these mostly alt-right, white supremacy, neo-Nazi groups. So both those things are happening at the same time, and that is obviously a bit of a scary situation for the power grid to be in.
That's a very gnarly two-prong attack. You're trying to defend yourself from a global nation state actor, and then at the same time from internal actors who in their own vernacular would probably consider themselves to be patriotic in nature with whatever it is that they're doing. That's another term that has been appropriated in wild directions, in my own personal opinion. That's tough to handle.
Yeah. Nation,
state, and local. I mean, that pack a lunch, that's gonna take a full day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's where, it's my job isn't to regulate the power grid and make sure that it's up to date, but it does. And it seems like that would be a difficult job right now and an intense one.
So you've been looking at this stuff for 6 years. What have you changed about your own life since you've recognized the vulnerabilities? Have you changed anything about the way that you live your life? Or do you have some spare battery phone, chargers? So I forgot to ask you, actually, where do you live?
I live in DC.
Oh,
yeah. I'm from
You're probably fine.
Originally.
robust power network. You're like, whatever. It's just we'll just be totally fine. Yeah. No, but seriously, I mean, you were looking deeply into this stuff. Has it changed anything about how you live your life?
I can't say super dramatically, and probably part of that reason is I am not. I wouldn't say I'm taking huge risks online or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm not but in terms of the threat of a power grid shutdown, I mean, I certainly have my escape plan, but I would hope to be home in my home state of Minnesota then, because I have quicker access to the Canadian border, for sure.
Oh, Canadians, come save us. No, I mean, it's a scary thought when we realize, again, how thin the veneer is that separates functioning society from kind of turning into chaos. And then I forget who associate the quote to, but we're 9 meals away from chaos at any moment. So about 3 days from society falling apart. I have friends who work in the preparation space. They talk about having food and water, and usually they say, have some form of being able to make electricity, whether it be, a solar ability, a generator, a combination of the two, battery packs, all of that stuff. I mean, I don't know if I was in your shoes. I think I would have a battery pack in every backpack that I had. I don't know. I think it would scare the crap out of me. And it would constantly be on the back of my mind.
Yeah. My husband would probably say, well, your phone is always dead anyway. So
Sounds like my daughter is constantly getting alerts. Your phone is lower than 10%. I'm like, plug your phone in.
Yeah. So maybe the key is to just learn to live off the grid, and then we'll all be fine.
Oh, I think we would be so much better. Problem is we'll be well into those 9 meals by that point, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Even though I do think if most of the modern conveniences were shut off, specifically things on our smartphones, it would be better pretty rapidly, but we'd have a dip first. Mm-hmm. We'd have to work our way through the dip.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What else do you want to leave people with? I'll give you closing thoughts, anything on this subject, the groups themselves. What do you want to leave the listeners with?
I guess I would, it's a good question. I guess I would say, don't despair. There is definitely, I think it's good to be informed on these things. I think it's very important to understand the threats our country and our infrastructure is facing. I think it's important to understand the infrastructure that powers us every day. That's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned covering the grid over the last 6 years is, I look around just at everyday life with a whole new perspective of, oh yeah, I know what that substation does. So it's important to not take for granted the infrastructure that we have and the amazing technology that powers our daily lives. But it's also there are real threats out there, and it's good to be aware of those for sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest. See you then.